To begin today's demonstration, we're going to play the role of a design engineer. In this case, Dave. Dave is going to be searching for a bracket that he's been working on and wants to understand the current status of the simulation request he logged against an earlier iteration of this bracket. Very quickly through the search results, I can visualize the side bracket as the simulation request was logged against and go to the information page of this earlier iteration of the side bracket to explore more information about it. In this case, the side bracket happens to be a machine component that was designed, and a request for simulation was written against revision A of this bracket. Selecting on the Simulation Request tab will execute a report powered by ThingWorx that will query all the revisions and iterations of the bracket and report any simulation request that was logged against any one of those specific versions. In this case, we can see we have a simulation request that has been completed, and we'll view the detailed information about the request. Here we've captured attributes relevant to simulation requests. In this case, the name, the category, the type of requested simulation, the reason for the simulation, a need by date, and a detailed description of what's required. We've also captured an annotation against this model. The annotation will help convey the boundary conditions to the analyst that will be responsible for completing the simulation request as we proceed through the workflow. In this case, we've clearly articulated what holes are fixed and where the force should be applied in what direction. Continuing to look at more information on the simulation request, we can see what objects and versions of the objects the request is written against. In this case, we've written this request against version A.2 of the CAD model and its associated part. We also provide another way to quickly access the boundary conditions that you saw a moment ago with the annotation that was made on the model. The last thing that I would like to point out is the flexibility that you have using this type of simulation request. You can power the request by executing and tracking action items associated with the request, or if you'd like to formalize a process, you could use Windchill's workflow capabilities to drive a repeatable process for the analyst and the design engineer to collaborate on the simulation request and also include approvers and reviewers of the simulation request. In this case, this is a completed simulation request, and you can see the 3 tasks that were completed, whom they were completed by, and the date and timestamp that each task was completed. Another means of collaborating between the analyst and the design engineer is to utilize discussion forums. Discussion forums can be related to each simulation request and a great means of capturing communication between the requester and the analyst who is performing the simulation. Lastly, we have a place for all of the results to be logged against the simulation request. In this example, we have 3 different document types that can be associated with the simulation request. and a place for simulation models to be associated to the request as well. Let's take a look at the information pages of some of the related simulation documents to the simulation request. The first example that we're going to take a look at is a simulation report. The simulation report represents the final written report by the analyst that summarizes the findings of the simulation that was requested and run by the analyst. This type of report can take on many formats. Typically, we've seen customers templatize the report format, which is a capability that we offer in Windchill as well, so that the results are delivered in a consistent fashion. It incorporates all the information that is requested and typically used by the design engineer and or analyst to make a decision. Obviously, you've seen the mesh, the boundary conditions, and some displacement and structural results based on the analysis that was performed. All captured in the report and linked back to the simulation request. So I can traverse that association bidirectionally. The next example that we're going to take a look at is simulation data. In this case, we've uploaded a zip file that is 1.5 gigabytes in size to the Windchill server and associated this data back to the simulation request. Another way of actually relating simulation data sets to simulation requests in Windchill is through an external document type. Essentially, this is just a pointer to an external location where large data sets can be uploaded. In this case, you see the example of that large data set being uploaded to SharePoint, but however related back to the original simulation request. Let's navigate back to the original version 8.2 of the side bracket that particular simulation request was logged against, and go to the latest version, in this case B.2, where we've modified the side bracket to take advantage of an additive manufacturing approach rather than a machine approach. We'd like to execute a new simulation request based on the updated design. So in this case, we're just going to initiate a new simulation request from the Actions dropdown on version B of the part and define the name of the simulation request, specify the category, the reason for the request, what type of simulation is required, and I can actually input more than one type if I choose to do so. When do I need the simulation completed by? And I have a field for entering a detailed description of the request to convey to the approver of the request and also to the analyst that will be assigned this simulation request for completion. Step 2 is to collect and associate any annotations to the request. So as we demonstrated earlier, we're going to associate some boundary conditions on this new version of the model. And we're also going to collect the CAD data that's associated to this particular part as well, so that is easily accessible by the analyst to leverage that CAD model to perform the analysis. And upon completion of the new simulation request form, we'll submit that into the workflow process. Let's change role to James. James's responsibility is to approve any simulation requests, as well as determine who the analyst is going to be to fulfill the request. So reviewing the task details, I have all of the attributes about the simulation request, what's needed, the description, the task instructions, a link to the version of the model that the simulation request is related to, as well as the associated annotation. And in this case, I have a pool of analysts that are readily available that I could assign this task to. But in this case, I'm going to remove 3 users and assign it to James. Then I'll complete this particular task by providing my electronic signature, by inputting my username and password. And then I can also start to populate the discussion forum so I can collaborate between myself and Dave as the design engineer who requested this analysis. So I'm just going to put here a short note to let him know I'm going to work on this as soon as possible after I complete a couple other requests. Moving on to the next step of the process, a task is delivered to the assigned analyst to complete the assigned simulation request. Again, using task form templates, we can deliver the task that provides all the relevant information to the role that's completing the task. Again, we have the detailed description, the associated review objects, in this case Rev B of the bracket, access to the discussion forum, and the ability to complete my task. But in this case, I have explicit instructions that I need to perform and run the required simulation, create the summary report, and relate it to the simulation request, associate any new or defeatured CAD models to the request, and then complete it. So let's go to the details page of the simulation request. And we're going to bypass conducting all the analysis work in the desired tool that the analyst needed to use to complete that particular task. And we're just going to start creating our simulation documents and relating them to the request. In this case, we're going to create our simulation report. So that's one of the 3 types of documents that I can associate to a simulation request. And if need be, as I mentioned earlier, we could have a template for our simulation reports. But in this case, I already have a report written in Microsoft Word. I'm just going to browse to that content locally on my hard drive, upload it to create that new simulation report document. And by selecting Finish, it will associate that document to the originating simulation request. I could perform the same action for the simulation data as well if I wanted to capture the locale of that information as well. But in this case, for the sake of time, we're just going to complete our task and continue on with the workflow to facilitate a review by the requesting design engineer to review the results, make sure there's no questions outstanding before the simulation request is actually completed. Let's change gears back to Dave, the design engineer, who made the original request, and he's delivered a task to review the simulation results. Again, with subject information on his original request, a link to the simulation request where you can easily gain access to the simulation reports and provide comments and use a discussion forum to provide further clarification if he had any questions after he's reviewed the simulation report. I like to use this task assistant to help me navigate back and forth between the subject of the task and getting back to the task. So here I have quick access using the simulation documents and navigating to the simulation report that was written and authored by the analyst. And I can quickly get back to my task using the task assistant after I've reviewed it. And I can either send it back for more rework if something was missed or done incorrectly, or I could accept and approve the task, and that will run the simulation request to the completion state. One last capability I want to show you here is the execution of a saved report. So as an analyst, I may want to understand all the simulation requests that have been assigned in general or specifically to me. So I can run a report to extract all of those types of requests and create this dashboard so I understand the quantity of simulation requests per lifecycle state, what the average time is to complete a simulation request, what are the most frequently requested simulation types, or I can turn off all of those filters and just review all the summary information of all the requests that I have created in managing that process within Windchill.